BARK Radio.
The Big Ten is the home of the two most recent national champions in college football, and heading into this season, it might look deeper than ever in terms of talent, but with a pretty wide open top tier. And a lot of that has to do with the turnover within the conference, especially at the quarterback position. There's so many new names and strong talents in the Big Ten, it's really hard to pinpoint which team is going to come out on top in 2025. And looking around at schedules, some of these teams may be looking at playoff bids with potentially 3 losses on their schedule, while some others may need to dominate all year long to get their shot. Regardless, I'm going to do my best to break down each team throughout the power rankings and position group rankings, so we'll go ahead and start up at the top of the list, heading over to Happy Valley. Penn State is my preseason number 1 team in the Big Ten. They return a ton of production and bring in some studs to the portal on both sides of the ball to replace some key departures and bolster the weapons for Drew Aller. Starting with the offense, I think they've got the conference's best unit with Aller as my QB1, Singleton and Allen being my top running backs in the conference, and then a receiving transfer trio of Trevor Pena, Devontae Ross, and Kyron Hudson to load up that room. And depth guys like Liam Clifford, Tyseer Denmark, and potentially freshman standout Kobe Howard as well. And of course, maybe the most important piece is an offensive line with some maulers, led by one of the country's best interior linemen in Vega Ione. Defensively, they reloaded the room, picking up Amari Campbell from North Carolina and King Mack from Alabama. And they returned star talent and Danny Dennis Sutton off the edge and Zane Durant on the interior. Instead of a pretty strong secondary with A.J. Harris and Zakee Wheatley back, and Elliott Washington emerging on the other side. In terms of the schedule, I think Penn State has a pretty solid chance of winning 11 games. They get Oregon and Indiana at home, and then Ohio State on the road. Those are the 3 toughest matchups. And other than that, the next toughest is either at Iowa or Nebraska in Happy Valley. So definitely some droppable games, but with their talent advantage, 11 wins and potentially 12 if they're finally able to outbattle the Buckeyes this season. But until we see that happen, it's really hard to predict. So my best guess will be an 11-1 season from the Nittany Lions as they head back to Indy and the college football playoffs as a real title threat this season. The defending national champs come in at number 2 for me. I don't know if they make the title game, but from a roster standpoint, I feel comfortable believing they're a top 2 or 3 team in the conference. Julian Sayin gets the keys this year after very minimal time as a freshman, but I've got a lot of confidence in him growing a ton this season considering the weapons at his arsenal and his talent level. We may see some ups and downs, especially Texas week 1 and at Washington week 5. But towards the end of the season for the Penn State game and potentially on the road at Michigan, I would expect him to be pretty comfortable controlling the offense. When you have a freak talent as strong as Jeremiah Smith out wide, it's hard to underperform, and they've got a loaded room of unproven studs behind him, with Carnell Tate being the standout, and then Brandon Ennis, Bryson Rogers, Mylan Graham, and maybe Quincy Porter making some noise this year. The running back room is completely different now with James Peoples and West Virginia transfer CJ Donaldson coming in. And I'm curious to see how smooth the offense looks early considering they replaced so much on the O-line and have new starters basically everywhere except for Smith and Tate. The defensive side of the ball is in a pretty similar situation with superstar safety Caleb Downs back to lead the group and a couple other returning contributors like Sonny Styles, Davison Igbinosin, and Jermaine Matthews coming back. But a bunch of new names in the fold including North Carolina transfer Bo Atkinson and breakout candidates Edric Houston and Kenyatta Jackson on the line. I've also got my eye on true freshman corner Devin Sanchez emerging this season. The biggest worry for this team is the amount of attrition, but it's Ohio State. Maybe it isn't great against Texas or Michigan, but we know they'll be fine, which is why I'm confident at them at number 2. Oregon is a really interesting team for 2025. They replace a lot of offensive production with the losses of Dylan Gabriel, Tez Johnson, Jordan James, and several offensive linemen. But I have a ton of talent still with former 5-star Dante Moore stepping in at quarterback and 1,400-yard rusher Mekhi Hughes coming over from Tulane to lead the backfield with Noah Whittington. And a really strong-looking offensive line with Laulalu, World, and Pregnon being 3 of my top 15 linemen in the conference. The receiving core is going to be a lot different, though, especially with the loss of Evan Stewart for the majority of the season. True freshman 5-star DeCorian Moore is my top guy in the room, and I think Jeremiah McClellan and Kyler Casper are definite breakout contenders, along with Justice Lowe and Gary Bryant. But the number 1 option might end up being tight end Kenyon Sadiq, who I expect to be among the best tight ends in all of college football this season. Flipping over to the defense, the Ducks look great in some areas, with Purdue transfer Dylan Thieneman being a top 25 player in the country to me, and some other studs in Matayo Uyunglele, Bryce Botcher, and Tatum Tuioti back. I really like what Tuioti brings to the edge room, along with Matayo, which could definitely make that front 7 elite. And in the secondary, Theron Johnson's a great boundary corner coming in from Northwestern, and I expect Jaden Kennedy to play nickel or opposite Thieneman deep. But there could be some other guys that need to step up and fill a spot there as well. Overall, I definitely see Oregon as a potential playoff contender, especially given the schedule. At Penn State, week 5 is a tough draw, and they travel to Washington in the final week of the season. But the rest is pretty standard matchups that Oregon should handle if they're as good as we think. So I'm definitely thinking 10-2 or 11-1 as realistic outcomes for the Ducks this season. I'm very high on Michigan for this season, but there's no doubt they're a wild card this year, especially considering a true freshman is likely the starting quarterback in Bryce Underwood. but he's considered one of the best recruits in history for a reason, and there's definitely a chance he's exceptional for Michigan as a freshman. There will obviously be growing pains throughout the year, but I definitely think the Michigan offense improved drastically this offseason, starting with a coordinator change with Chip Lindsey coming in and actually installing a real passing offense with a much, much better quarterback room than last season, but also an improved offensive line with some continuity there, and a better running back room with Alabama transfer Justice Haynes and Jordan Marshall, and a strong wide receiver one in Donovan McCulley coming over from Indiana. But regardless of how the offense looks, the defense will again be a strong point. Michigan returns some serious talent on the defensive line per usual with Derek Moore, Rayshon Benny, TJ Guy, and a few interior transfers in the unit. And then a strong linebacker room with Barham and Hausman back, as well as potential breakout candidates in Cole Sullivan and Jimmy Rolder. And finally, a strong secondary again led by Jair Hill, a potentially healthy Rod Moore, and then Zeke Berry. Some transfer talent in the Metcalf brothers and potentially star freshman Shamari Earls could break out. And then the schedule is very easy in my mind, besides the obvious Week 2 test on the road at Oklahoma, and then at Nebraska and USC Weeks 4 and 7. They get Ohio State at home this year and avoid all of Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, and Illinois. So in all, I could see any range of 8 to 11 wins as realistic outcomes for the Wolverines this season, pretty much all depending on how the quarterback situation plays out as a freshman. I fully expect Indiana to not miss a beat this season, and honestly maybe even take a step forward in terms of talent and performance. Maybe not record-wise, and maybe they don't make the playoffs, but the schedule isn't bad again, and I think they've upgraded in some areas. Fernando Mendoza comes over from Cal to be QB1, and I think he's arguably a top 5 quarterback in the conference. And the running back room looks loaded with Maryland transfer Roman Hemby, UAB transfer Lee Beebe Jr., and returnee Kalen Black as the top 3. Elijah Surratt returns as one of the 5 best receivers in the country to me, and the depth is there with Omar Cooper, Mekhi Jackson, and Jonathan Brady, as well as Tennessee transfer Holden Stays at tight end. The offensive line may be slightly regressing this season, but I still like the unit overall. I have it ranked 7th in the Big Ten, but top 25 in the country, so offensively it should be a well-balanced squad. And defensively, I think the 3-headed monster of D'Angelo Pons, Mikhail Kamara, and Aiden Fisher is one of the best trios in the conference. Devin Boykin comes over from NC State at safety, and Amari Farrell will be his counterpart, who had a great year last year for the Hoosiers. Overall, I think this is a top 5 or 6 team in the Big Ten in terms of talent, and combined with the schedule being fairly easy, besides on the road at Penn State, Oregon, and Iowa, I could definitely see 9 or 10 wins again for Kurt Cignetta's squad in year 2. I've got USC 6th in the conference right now. I'm pretty high on them as a team this year, mainly because of the strides they make defensively last season, combined with a stronger offense. Lake McCree, Jacoby Lane, and Mekhi Lemon make up one of the best wide receiver tight end trios in the country, and they add Prince Strachan from Boise State to the mix as well. Jade Mayaba will be the start of the season, and I expect him to contend for some conference awards by the end of the season, honestly. I think he has a talent to be a top 3 quarterback in the Big Ten, both performance-wise and statistically. The offense being elite will really come down to how well they run block for transfer backs Wayman Jordan and Eli Sanders. I like both of them as shifty backs in space, but strong offensive line play definitely needs to be a thing for them to operate at their best. Now over to the defense, I said last year was definitely a big step in the right direction as a program, and they bring in some key defensive transfers I love with Bishop Fitzgerald deep, DJ Harvey from San Jose State on the boundary, and both Keyshawn Silver and Jamal Jarrett on the interior defensive line. I like Eric Gentry as a potential leader back at linebacker, and I definitely see Cameron Fountain and Jide Abasiri as big breakout candidates on the defensive line. The schedule this season is definitely tough, with Michigan at home and all of Illinois, Notre Dame, Nebraska, and Oregon on the road. So with that, the record may not fully reflect the talent level of this team unless they're able to take on some of those games. But I definitely think they've got a shot in almost all those matchups at minimum, and USC could be a sleeper in the conference this season regardless. I have Illinois ranked 7th in the Big Ten, but there's a real chance they contend for the playoffs this year looking at the schedule. I really only view 4 of their conference games as tough matchups for this team, and of course at Duke in Week 2 is tough. But there's no doubt they're talented enough to compete against everyone in their schedule as they did for much of last year. Luke Altmaier is seen as one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten by many, despite some real struggles against the top teams in 2024. But honestly, I could definitely see a step taken from him in performance. The wide receiver room isn't as strong this year to me, but Hudson Clement was a very solid addition, and Justin Boak's a sleeper for breakout wide receiver too. And we'll see if Caden Fagan is healthy, but they've got good running back depth with Aiden Lafferty and Khalil Valentine behind them. The offensive line should be very strong this season with a ton of continuity, especially in J.C. Davis and Melvin Priestley returning at the tackle spots. And again, we should see a stout Illini defense led by Gabe Akis off the edge and Xavier Scott in the secondary as top 100 players in the country to me. I could definitely see the secondary being another strength with Torrey Cox, Tyler Strain, and Caleb Patterson, and even Miles Scott returning as well. Any defensive line breakouts from transfer guys like James Thompson, Leon Lowry, or Tamia Durajay, and there's no reason this can't be one of the better defenses in the conference, which could really ascend the Illini to that playoff contention I mentioned was possible earlier. Washington is definitely a sleeper this year in the Big Ten for me. I have them ranked inside my top 25 nationally, and I can see them knocking off some top opponents in the Big Ten this season playing more than just spoiler. Damon Williams just looks like an it factor type of quarterback to me. He was great last year in limited time as a freshman backup, and now gets the reins with some solid continuity around him. Jonah Coleman and Denzel Boston return as two of the top weapons in the conference at their position, and Decker DeGraff is in line for a major jump in production after some pretty stellar freshman moments. But they also bring in an underrated transfer pickup in Penn State's Amari Evans and get back Kevin Green from injury. So Williams will have quite a few weapons at his disposal on top of a few returners and transfers on the O-line. Defensively, Washington brings in former Purdue head coach Ryan Walters at coordinator after Belichick poached his son for North Carolina. Walters had a ton of success in the same position at Illinois before the disastrous run at Purdue, but this defense does have some solid pieces after adding star corner Takerio Davis and a stud linebacker Jacob Manu from Arizona. I'm a big fan of Northern Arizona transfer safety Alex McLaughlin as well, but I'm even bigger on Tariq Alukta from Washington State. Obviously, a ton of new pieces can cause some instability, but the returners in Ephesians Prysock and Isaiah Ward can help with that a bit. But overall, from a talent standpoint, this does look like a solid group on paper. So combined with a high potential offense, Washington can definitely compete with some of the best. The schedule is pretty tough with Ohio State, Michigan, Illinois, and Oregon all on it, but I see a minimum of 7 wins on the table for the Huskies, with potential for more if any upsets come along the way. Mark Gronowski might completely change the game for Iowa football this season. It has been a long time since Iowa fans have had confidence in their quarterback, and not only does he bring a lot of FCS experience, but he's shown dual threat ability that can change the dynamic of the offense. Gronowski's weapons aren't the best, but there's some solid potential there with basically the entire receiving core returning in Gill, Vanderzee, Anderson, and Ostrenga. I also think freshman Thomas Meyer could end up an impactful player at tight end, but no doubt the bread and butter of this offense comes down to the offensive line supporting both the rushing attack and the passing game. Logan Jones and Jennings Dunker return as two of the best linemen in the conference, and Bo Stevens should take another leap. That unit being a real strength again will definitely allow Iowa to have a successful year offensively for the first time in what seems like a very long time. On the other side of the ball, Iowa usually is very dominant, and this year probably won't be much different, but there's a lot of question marks outside of star safety Xavier Nwankpa and Monster defensive tackle Aaron Graves. I do really like Ethan Hurkett on the edge, and I expect Max Llewellyn to take a big step opposite him though, and Deshaun Lee coming back to be one of the better boundary corners in the Big Ten is definitely a possibility. But the unit does look a little underwhelming compared to previous seasons, with the losses of Deontay Craig, Yaya Black, Sebastian Castro, Jay Higgins, Nick Jackson, and Quinn Schulte this offseason. Iowa usually replaces their guys pretty quickly though with a great program depth, so I definitely expect this defense to be solid by the end of the year, but I do worry about this team heading into Ames week 2 and having to play all of Indiana, Penn State, Oregon, USC, and Nebraska across the year. Minnesota's been picked by some as the Indiana of this season, a team who sort of comes out of nowhere and takes a playoff spot thanks to an underrated roster and a really easy schedule. I don't really disagree with that assessment. It's probably unlikely unless they pull off an upset or two, but the schedule is absolutely set up for a potential 9-win season. They'll head to Ohio State, Iowa, and Oregon, but get Nebraska at home, and the rest of the schedule is very winnable. And looking at the roster, I think a strong debut season from Drake Lindsey would give the Gophers a genuine shot at shocking the nation. They've got one of the best running back rooms in the country with Darius Taylor, A.J. Turner, and Cam Davis, and a pretty underrated receiving core with Javon Tracy coming over from Miami, Ohio, and Logan Loya from UCLA. Not to mention a potential two-way superstar, Coy Parrish, getting involved, as well as former 4-star Malachi Coleman transferring in, and Lemeki Brockington returning. It really just depends on how the offensive line can perform after losing an elite talent in Ariante Ursary. They do bring in a couple transfers, but the unit is fairly new and unproven, so a rough year could really spoil things for this offense. On the bright side for the Gophers, the defense looks really good to me. Of course, Coy Parrish is the star of the show, but his co-part in Kerry Brown is a stud, and Anthony Smith could win some awards off the edge this season. I think Maverick Baranowski could be a great leader this season as the Mike, and really help set the tone for this defense, being a potential top 5 unit in the Big Ten when it's said and done. So again, looking at the roster, it really comes down to Lindsey and the offensive line performing, and if they do, there's a real chance Minnesota can go from a 7-win squad to a playoff threat. 11 for Nebraska seems a bit low because I definitely see this team competing at a pretty high level and maybe pulling off upsets over Michigan and USC, who I have well above them this season. But I really think the Big Ten is just very deep in terms of potential sleeper squads, and if things go right, could definitely be one of them. Dylan Raiola should absolutely take a step this year after a pretty decent freshman season, and now an improved crop of weapons around him with Dane Key and Isaiah Hunter coming in. And I think offensive line looks pretty solid now with their incoming transfers of Rocco Spindler and Elijah Pritchett. Emmett Johnson returns to be the RB1, and I'm expecting a strong year from him statistically. And maybe the biggest secret weapon this offense can deploy this year is quarterback turned tight end Heinrich Harburg getting involved. Definitely a ton of potential for an improved offensive unit this season, which could be huge considering how the defense looks. Not many surefire stars yet, but a ton of good players and some key transfer pickups to boost the unit. I really like Sierra Wright at corner. The entire secondary is pretty experienced. Georgia Southern transfer Marquise Watson-Trent is someone I'm really excited about at the mic. And of course he's got Dasan McCullough, Vincent Shavers, and Willis McGahee the fourth around him. My big breakout pick for the D-line this year is Riley Van Poppel. The sophomore played a lot as a true freshman and then redshirted last year, but is finally in line for a big year 3 as a starter, and him coming along could do a lot for the defensive line unit, needing guys to step up. Looking at the schedule, I'd expect this team to be favored in arguably every game besides Michigan, at Minnesota, USC, and at Penn State. My best guess would be 7 or 8 wins, but as I said, an upset or 2 is definitely realistic, so 9 or 10 is not completely out of the question. Rutgers is at the top of my next tier of Big Ten teams in terms of talent, but I really do not expect anything out of them record-wise this season. I think they're a better team on paper than everyone I have below them, but having the schedule they have this year is just brutal. Iowa and Oregon at home, and then Minnesota, Washington, Illinois, Ohio State, and Penn State all on the road. That's 7 games I don't expect them to be favored in right there, and they also take on 2 of the best teams in the MAC to start the year in Ohio and Miami, Ohio. Like I said, from a roster standpoint, I think this is a top 45 or so team in the country. I am not a Kelly McManus fan at all, though, but he's got a solid offensive line and a great group of weapons around him. DT Sheffield coming in from North Texas instantly becomes a top 15 receiver in the conference to me. And he's got Ian Strong and a super underrated player in KJ Duff as well. And then Antoine Raymond, CJ Campbell, and Samuel Brown is a really strong trio of backs to continue the rushing success the program has had recently. The defense should be a strong suit again as well, thanks to incoming transfers Eric O'Neal and Bradley Weaver on the D-line. O'Neal's one of the most underrated defenders in the country in my opinion, so I'm excited to see what he can do at the Big Ten level. Cam Miller, Bo Masco, and Jacoby Henderson should be a really solid corner trio as well. The big question will be replacing the production they lost. Tyreen Powell, Shaquan Loyal, Flip Dixon, and Aaron Lewis were big losses. They do bring leading tackler Dario Jabome back as the leader of the defense this year. Just again, despite a solid roster on paper, I really do not expect anything beyond fighting for a bowl appearance this season from the Scarlet Knights because of how brutal that schedule is. Michigan State is definitely an interesting team this year, not necessarily a sleeper team or even close to a top 25 threat at all, but good enough to scare a suspect team towards the top and definitely looking bowl eligible possibly. And a lot of what will make them great this season is a receiving core combined with Aiden Childs' dual threat ability. Last season, he really struggled to avoid turnovers, and if that's an issue yet again, Michigan State will suffer losses in games they really should not be dropping. But a cleaner season from him with a receiving room as talented as Marsh, Kelly, McCray, and Vellingar, and there aren't much of a limit on what this offense can do. I'm not the biggest fan of the O-line, and the running back room definitely has some question marks with no FBS experience in the room, so I'm expecting this team to be pretty pass-heavy. So Nick Marsh should be in line for a massive year 2 after a stellar freshman season. I do have a lot of questions surrounding the Spartans' defense, though. It wasn't a great unit last year overall, and they've lost some decent production to the portal and graduation. We'll need to see guys like Malik Spencer, Wayne Matthews, Nakai Martinez, and Jordan Hall step up as leaders this year. I'm a fan of the Joshua Eaton and Dontavius Nash pickups, but as a unit, there's not much that really gives me confidence they can control a game against a good offense. And looking at the schedule, there's arguably 7 or 8 games they will not be favored in. So the defense will need to come along rather quick to avoid disaster. With that said, I think my honest prediction for the Spartans is at least 5-7, maybe 6-6 or 7-5, but there's just too many tougher games to really consider anything more a strong possibility, unless they make some major strides early and knock off a team like USC or Nebraska on the road. Wisconsin is one team I'm definitely not high on for this season, both from a roster perspective and a schedule standpoint. They've got some talented guys scattered throughout the roster, don't get me wrong. They definitely have a leg up on a few other squads, but the number of question marks and my lack of faith in both Billy Edwards as a quarterback and the Wisconsin offensive system has a lot to do with my expectations being lower. Quite frankly, Maryland had a pretty loaded offensive attack last year with 2 draft pick wide receivers, a good tight end room, and some solid running backs to support the offense, and Billy Edwards did not perform the way a solid quarterback to me would. And on top of that, I just think this Wisconsin team has less talent around the offense than his Maryland squad did a year ago. Vinny Anthony is a very strong receiver, but outside of them, they really need some unproven guys to take charge for the offense. Any of Dylan Jones, Cade Yakimelli, or Darian Dupree emerging as a strong lead back will be a big plus, but they'll need the offensive line to perform as well. Defensively, the Badgers bring back Ricardo Hallman, Austin Brown, and Nazir Forkarian as a good corner trio. And I'm high on the Corey Walker, Dale Peterson edge pairing, but overall, I'm not too thrilled looking at the defense this year. And they'll have to go up against one of the toughest schedules in the country, facing Alabama in the non-conference again, and playing 8 of my top 10 teams in the conference, sans just Penn State and USC. I really just don't see a pathway for success this year for them, and missing another bowl game would certainly put Luke Fickell's future as head coach in jeopardy. I have UCLA all the way down at 15th in the conference entering this year, despite some bigger portal pickups to help boost the roster talent, which honestly was in a pretty rough place early on in the offseason. I was originally excited for Joey Aguilar entering the Big Ten from App State, but then we had the Nico Iamaleava fiasco unfold and basically had our first college football trade scenario happen. And now the Bruins have a much better prospect at the helm with Nico, but it remains to be seen how effective he is as a leader. On the field, the performance was pretty strong at Tennessee, but he had a great offense around him compared to what he'll have this season, looking at the offensive line and the weapons. UCLA ranked 111th in returning production overall, and the only transfer I have high hopes for is former Cal starters Javian Thomas and Mikey Matthews at running back and receiver. I do think both Quasi Gilmer and Titus Atamalala are decent receivers. I really just don't have much hope for Nico being super effective given what his offensive line is looking like, especially without a truly elite target to rely on. But moving on over to the defense, I have a bit more excitement in this unit, especially for the secondary. I think Andre Jordan Jr. is a really solid corner talent, and I'm excited to see what Roderick Pleasant can become getting a bigger opportunity now. Both Key Lawrence and Cole Martin bring experience to the secondary as well. The front seven's a bit of a different story, though. I like Keanu Williams and Jacob Busick on the defensive line, and Jalen Woods is my pick for breakout Bruin defender. But outside of that, there's going to have to be a few guys who really step up to boost the production of the defense this season. The schedule looks really tough, even with the non-conference games, so my expectations are pretty low, but I can agree that Nico's talent level could definitely elevate the ceiling of this team. Northwestern's more than likely going to be fighting for bowl eligibility at best this season, but I think this squad has a little promise because of how much is new. They bring in pretty much a completely new offense through the portal this season, which actually has me a little excited to see how it works out. I wouldn't say it's the highest quality of transfer by any means, but there's some legit talent in this offense. Xavier Gray is huge, coming over from Liberty to form one of the best tackle duos in the conference with Caleb Tiernan. And Preston Jones may have lost a starting job to Kevin Jennings last year at SMU, but he's shown the ability to compete at a high level in the FBS. Cam Porter and Joseph Hyman return in the backfield, but the entire wide receiver room is new. Griffin Wild comes over from South Dakota State as a wide receiver 1, but everyone else has little to no Power 5 production, so we'll have to see how the room performs and who Stone connects with most. The defense actually returns a solid amount of production. Aiden Hubbard and Mac Uelin come back to lead the front seven, and I'm fully expecting a breakout year from Anto Saka to complement the two. Yanni Karlaftis comes over Purdue to help make an impact there as well, and Jacksonville State star corner Fred Davis could definitely be a high-impact player in the secondary. Dylan Tatum missed all last season at Michigan State with an injury, and now could be elevating into a bigger role in this defense after transferring in, as there's a lot of room for improvement this year as a secondary to new additions. My expectation is that this defense is towards the middle or bottom half of the Big Ten statistically, but I wouldn't call it a bad unit by any means. I definitely see the potential. I just think the schedule compared with their talent level is way too much to consider them higher than this spot in the power rankings. I'm in agreement with the mass majority that this will likely be a rough year for Maryland. Despite a very light schedule compared to some other teams throughout the conference, this team really just lacks experience and talent in some key areas. Although I am excited to see the growth this team, especially the offense, can take this season from a youth standpoint. I don't think he starts early or at all, but I'm pretty high on Malik Washington long-term as the quarterback for the Terps, and I actually think the ceiling improves a fair amount with him at the helm. But Justin Martin seems like the guy, at least early on, with an extra year of experience in college football. Martin will have some decent receiving talent around him as well, with Oklahoma transfer Jaleel Farouk coming in, paired up with Octavian Smith out wide, and Dorian Fleming at tight end. And Nolan Ray steps in as RB1 this year with Roman Hemby off to Indiana. Ray had a pretty solid year last season, so he could be in line for Maryland's next star back. However, the offensive line will need to be a strong point to make things work. Isaiah Wright, Alan Heron, and Aliu Bob return, but I don't really love the unit as a whole. But growth is expected and could definitely play a part in Maryland being better than I expect. The defense may be an issue as well with not much returning production. Jalen Husky returns to one of the better safeties in the conference, but they don't return much more than that. The defensive line is going to be basically brand new. There are some intriguing names there that could take a leap and provide impact, like Cam Rice and D.D. Holmes, though. In the secondary, I think Jamari Glasker starts right away at cornerback 1. But again, the theme of this defense is going to be depth stepping into starting roles and performing. The schedule truly is not that difficult. I just question whether this team is good enough to compete, and it's more likely that they're a year away to me. Purdue has some of the highest turnover in the country from a roster perspective this season, and to be honest, this squad does not look very inspiring. I have zero expectations for the Boilermakers this season beyond just rebuilding and trying to build building blocks throughout the roster and establish a new culture under Barry Odom. I trust Odom to right the ship, but as the team stands now, it's not in a great spot. There are a lot of intriguing young players like Malachi Singleton, Nitro Tuggle, Michael Jackson III, TJ Lindsey, Breon Ishmael, and others that I can quickly identify as potential playmakers. But there really isn't much of experience anywhere besides Devin McCoby returning at running back, CJ Madden returning at edge, and some of the UNLV guys coming over with Odom. Whether it's Ryan Brown or Malachi Singleton leading the offense, I don't have much faith in either looking good with how the offensive line looks this year and the severe lack of continuity on the roster. But again, I wouldn't put much stock in their play. I think this year is about finding guys you like throughout the roster and growing as a team. The defensive line is probably my favorite part of the roster. CJ Nunnally was one of the best defensive linemen in the MAC last season at Akron, so he should be a solid pairing with CJ Madden. And Jameer Harkless is a very solid player on the interior. I am interested to see how their secondary performs, considering there really isn't much returning talent. But Tony Grimes has been around college football and several chances to play at the FBS level. But coming off a one-win season and as much turnover as this team has had on top of a schedule that includes all of USC, Notre Dame, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio State, Indiana, Washington, and Minnesota, I think even 3 wins would be an okay year 1 for Odom, and anything more would be really impressive to me. Here's my quarterback ranking list. This is definitely one of the hardest conferences to rank quarterbacks in, mainly due to the incredible amount of turnover and potential within the conference. Guys like Julian Sayin and Bryce Underwood are truly elite prospects but have no experience, so it's hard to rank them any higher than I did. But there is absolutely no reason either guy couldn't stand out and be a top 2 or 3 quarterback in the conference this season. I am a massive Damon Williams Jr. fan. What he showed last year was special for a freshman. I think he's got enough support to have a massive year 2. Dante Moore didn't look outstanding 2 years ago as a freshman, but this is such a different situation he's in now, and I really buy the talent and supporting cast. As for Luke Altmaier being this low, I really can't argue against anyone putting him much higher. I just personally haven't bought into him yet because of the lack of production against great teams last season, and the schedule is not very easy this year for him. And then I've got Nico all the way down at 10, mostly due to the lack of talent surrounding him, and it just being a brand new situation. But in a better spot, he definitely could be much higher with his talent level. Here's how I rank the top 30 running backs entering the year. The Singleton and Allen duo take the top 2 spots, and then both Minnesota and Rutgers land a trio of backs on the list. Jordan Marshall is someone I fully expect to break out as a star, splitting with Justice Haynes this year at Michigan. And then returning stars like McCoby and Porter may be a bit low just due to their depth of the conference and their situations. As for Wisconsin, I would definitely expect one of their 3 to establish themselves as a lead back, which would definitely result in them being higher. But I don't know which one it'll be, so all 3 were left off for now. Now on to the receivers. Evan Stewart, if healthy, would be my number 3, but he's likely missing the entire year, so I left him off. This is really a great group of receivers, honestly, especially at the top. I'm expecting a big debut and a big jump from both DeCorian Moore and Brandon Inniss this year, obviously. And then a bit further down, Donovan McCulley could definitely establish himself as a premier wide receiver 1 again and outperform his ranking. And some guys I can see skyrocketing up or onto this list are KJ Duff, Gary Bryant, Quasi Gilmer, Samaj Morgan, Caden Wetjen, Andrew Marsh, and Kobe Howard, just to name a few of them. My last position ranking will be the tight ends. Max Clare takes my top spot, followed by Kenyon Sadiq at 2. Marlon Klein and Addison Ostrenga are 2 clear breakout contenders on heavy tight end using teams. And then it seems like Dinkins has a slight advantage over Reynolds right now for Penn State, but either could emerge, as well as freshman Andrew Olesh. Decker DeGraff is my favorite sleeper for this year at Washington, and I could see Hogan Hansen making a big name for himself as well. And then Illinois has a really solid room of guys too, but I think Cole Rusk is going to be my favorite this year. My preseason first team All-Big Ten is pretty straightforward. These are the guys I expect to have the best statistical season of their position while also having the team competitiveness to match it. And for the offensive line, it's my personal best in the conference with 2 tackles, 2 guards, and a center. There's of course different running backs and receivers in this conference who could land here, but these are my picks for the top dogs. With the defense again, I went best player per position or biggest impact guys around the conference. For the second team, I went with Julian Sayin at quarterback. Any Ohio State quarterback is going to put up gaudy numbers with the weapons they have at their arsenal. So despite not currently being a top 3 quarterback in the conference for me just yet, I am expecting him to statistically perform towards the top of the list. Nick Marsh stands out to me as incredible receiver talent, so I gave him the nod for second team as well, and I chose Lemon over Lane for USC as I think he'll edge him out in targets. On the defensive side, I picked Edric Houston to be the big breakout player for the Buckeyes, and Tatum Tuioti is more of an edge, but deserves a second team nod to me, and his position flexibility can get him credit at linebacker. The same goes for Jair Hill in his second year as a starter, and I think a guy like Kamari Ramsey deserves love as a pretty underrated safety in this conference. Lastly, here's my third team. I went with Dante Moore over Williams, Mendoza, and Altmaier because I'm expecting Oregon to contend for the title, and I think statistically he sees a similar line, if not a better one. Justice Haynes may be more of a split back, but Michigan should be able to run the ball well enough to land an all-Big Ten team for sure. And then I have true freshman DeCorian Moore landing on third team. I truly believe he breaks out as their lead guy this season. Over the defensive side, I had to shout out Anthony Smith at Minnesota and Mac Uyalenga at Northwestern, who both deserve all Big Ten nods despite playing on lesser squads. And I think the same goes for Daryl Jabome this season. And then the secondary is pretty self-explanatory. Everyone there are studs on very competitive teams. That's it for my 2025 Big Ten preview. Let me know your thoughts down below on any of these teams being underrated or overrated in my power rankings, or any ideas you have for content on the channel you'd like to see in the future. As always, thanks for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
BARK Radio.